Hi, we want to welcome you to this webinar that's part of a larger series offering mental health and suicide prevention information, support, and resources in response to the global pandemic. My name is Kelsey Schmitz. I work for the University of Washington at the School Mental Health Assessment Research and Training Center, or SMART Center, as the School Mental Health Lead to the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. We are located in Seattle, Washington. As we're all trying to adapt to a new normal, this global pandemic has changed our jobs, our homes, our kids' schooling. Every parent is just trying to adjust to manage their changed work situation and changed home situation. In response to these critical needs, a group of organizations based in the Northwest region have quickly formed an alliance to join together and co-develop, co-deliver, co-sponsor, and co-brand resources and other information. In an effort to bring together in one spot a wealth of relevant information and access to school mental health experts, the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center and the UW SMART Center are partnering with organizations including Forefront Suicide Prevention Center, Northwest Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, Well Educator LLC, and others to bring you the Wellbeing Series. We offer this well-being series for kids, families, educators, focusing on mental wellness and suicide prevention. Our MHTTC is a SAMHSA-funded project, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. And as such, these views, opinions, and content expressed in this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Center for Mental Health Services, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, or the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. As I mentioned, this webinar you're about to watch is part of a larger Wellbeing series. We encourage you to visit the Wellbeing series website. You can see the link on this slide. You can follow this link and find registration links to different trainings, recordings, and presentation materials. We encourage you to come back often as we are adding new events on a regular basis. If you have questions about our Wellbeing series, please reach out to my colleague Megan Lucy at mlucy@uw.edu. The Mental Health Technology Transfer Center was funded by SAMHSA in 2018. It includes 10 regional centers, a National American Indian and Alaska Native Center, a National Hispanic and Latino Center, and a network coordinating office. Our Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center supports the states of Alaska, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. We are part of that larger MHTTC network that spans the United States. So even if you're joining us today or in the future outside of our region, which you're welcome to do, I want to make you aware of a resource that you can turn to in your area, and also invite you to continue to access information and support from other centers as well. We welcome you to reach out to our Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. We represent the School Mental Health Supplement to the Northwest MHTTC. My colleague Megan Lucy and I would love to hear from you. You can see our email on the slide, our phone number, our website, which is regularly updated with new information and resources, not just in response to the global pandemic, but other resources, training, and information related to school mental health. We welcome you to sign up for our newsletter that we send out monthly, where you'll receive updated resources, training alerts, and other information. We would also love to see you connect with us on social media. You can see our Twitter and our Facebook page there below. At this time, I want to turn it over to our hosts, and thank you all again for joining us today, and remind you to reach out and connect and let us know how we can support you.
Hello, and thank you for joining our webinar today. This is the voice of Jessica Swain Bradway, the Executive Director for Northwest PBIS Network. The Northwest PBIS Network is a regional network. We collaborate locally and even nationally to provide you with high quality training, technical assistance, and the resources you need to implement sustainable PBIS and MTSS. We are very lucky to be in partnerships with Washington's OSPI, Oregon's Department of Education, the University of Washington's Smart Center, the University of Oregon, the Nevada MTSS Project, the California PBIS Coalition, and of course, our very generous sponsors for the Well Educator series, the Northwest MHTTC. It is my honor to introduce our speaker and webinar for today, Dr. Renee Van Norman. Dr. Van Norman will be presenting on cultivating a community of compassion during times of stress. She's the educator and founder of Well Educator, LLC. She has expertise in many things, although she will be very humble about it. To name a handful of areas: special education, applied behavior analysis, early childhood, and teacher preparation. From her early career in the university setting, Dr. Van Norman realized that while educator wellness was of vast importance to the quality of work we do in schools, it received very little attention by the field at large. Dr. Van Norman has dedicated her passion and dedication to teaching educators how to develop their own skills for well-being. Her work is conceptually solid. The practices she shares are evidence-based and practical. We think you will both enjoy and benefit from today's webinar. As a reminder, you received guided notes for today's webinar via email. Please use these notes as you listen along. Engage in the materials, jot down your thoughts and questions, and build your concrete strategies for nurturing your well-being. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for taking care of our entire school community.
Hi, and welcome to the first session of the four-part Educator Wellness Series, Creating a Community of Compassion During Times of Stress. My name is Renee Van Norman, and I am the founder of Well Educator, a training and professional development service that partners with schools and educators to help boost educator resilience and performance through connection to values, purpose, and community. Let's start right off with the definition of compassion, because I'm going to be asking for some as I make my transition from speaking in front of a live audience to my computer screen, as I know many of you may be experiencing a similar struggle as you move some of your lessons online. Alina Aguilar defines compassion as empathy in action, where I usually rely on head nods and smiles and even those frowny faces for immediate feedback. I'll be sitting here doing the very best that I can do, not only to talk about self-compassion, but to model it as well. Enough about that. Shall we get started? First, I want to thank our sponsors, the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center Network and the Northwest PBIS Network, who worked at an incredible pace to bring you this webinar series, and many other webinars in response to a high demand for supports during this time when so many of us need resources, supports, and connection. Kudos to these two centers for being so responsive to the needs of the educational community. We thank you. So here is where I have a second ask of you. I ask that you become curious as you engage with the content and activities of this webinar. Ask yourself, how does this content or skills apply to me right here, right now, in this moment? What will work for me and what will I leave behind? How can I participate fully? Really lean in just to the edge of my comfort zone, and then maybe even a little bit further. How can you be fully present with just this moment, just this task, and fully engage with this webinar, even if it is a recording? And we're going to tell a little story. First, we'll look at the agenda before the story. First, we'll discuss the benefits of a mindful compassion and self-compassion on well-being of self and school community. We'll practice self-compassion exercises to enhance personal well-being. And we'll practice some compassion exercises to build strong, compassionate school communities. Let me orient you to some of your materials. There's some guided notes that you can follow along with and fill in as you feel appropriate. There's a resource list with lots of resources we'll go over at the end of the webinar. There's a how-to guide. We'll be doing our own loving kindness meditation. It's important that you make phrases that are meaningful for you. and there's a how-to guide to do just that. There's a loving kindness meditation guide by Maggie Rishi Productions. Maggie was nice enough to provide that for us. She's also doing some free yoga and wellness classes, and there's some information available to you in your packet. So right now I'm going to invite you to settle in. I'd like you to take a deep breath and let it out. And finish this statement for yourself. Right now, I will put aside my thoughts of, by, so I can. I'll provide a model. Right now, I will put aside my thoughts of a clunky presentation, any thoughts of anxiety, by these are just thoughts, taking deep breaths, speaking slowly, so I can be authentic in my thoughts, words, and actions, and be fully present here for you. Let's take a moment and finish that sentence for yourself. So you're an educator. This first then board isn't new to you. First, we're going to talk about self-compassion. Then we're going to talk about compassion. So here's that story I was talking about earlier. You're putting together your lesson materials to deliver to your students online, and you're feeling pretty confident you'll be able to engage your students. You're actually kind of excited to try out the new technology, and you're finding some gratitude in the experience. Then you get a text. Your teaching partner or colleague texts you, and they are suffering. They say they are drowning. They're even thinking of quitting. They can't handle the pressure and are losing sleep. You decide to call them. What do you say? How difficult was it to respond to your friend? What kinds of things did you say? Were they kind and helpful, or judgmental and mean? Not sure about you, but I find it much easier to support a friend who is suffering with compassionate, kind, and helpful statements than I do myself. In fact, sometimes I do quite the opposite. There's judgment, self-criticism, and a whole lot of shoulds. And the impact of that is a negative loop of self-criticism, the opposite of self-compassion. Dr. Kristen Neff, leading researcher on self-compassion, talks about self-compassion as treating ourselves as we would treat a dear friend who is having a hard time. Let's hear directly from Dr. Neff in this video on self-compassion.
What is self-compassion?
Well, I think it's usually easier for people to understand what self-compassion is if they think of what it feels like to have compassion for others, which is more familiar. So let's say you've got a good friend who you're very close to, and she tells you something that's gone wrong in her life, or maybe she's made some big mistake, blown it on a work assignment. So if you have compassion for your friend, the first thing is you're tuned into her suffering. I mean, maybe your friend doesn't even say she's upset, but you just notice the way she looks, and you say, "Oh, what's wrong? Tell me about it." So you've got to notice that she's suffering first, and then in response to that suffering, you have to be kind, caring, supportive, try to comfort your friend, soothe her, let her know that it's okay, let her know that you still care. And then finally, it's important to remember that suffering is part of the human experience. You might say to your friend, oh, it's only human, it happens to all of us, it's an experience that we all share, so your friend doesn't feel isolated in her suffering. So compassion really involves three basic components: noticing suffering, being kind and caring in response to that suffering, and remembering that imperfection is part of the human experience, something we all share.
And is this the same for self-compassion then?
Exactly the same. So with self-compassion, the most important step actually is to notice your own suffering. And a lot of people say, well, isn't that blindingly obvious? But in fact, it's not. Especially when your suffering comes from your own self-judgment and self-criticism. Some of our worst pain is when, we look in the mirror and you notice you've gained 10 pounds. Well, that is a real moment of suffering that's worthy and deserving of a compassionate, caring, comforting response. But most of us don't do that. We just keep on beating ourselves up. Or let's say something happens like your child gets sick. Most of us go straight into problem-solving mode. What do I have to do? Who do I have to call? And you forget to say, wow, this is really difficult. This is really stressful. I need some soothing and comforting. Most people forget that they need to give that to themselves. So again, with self-compassion, it's noticing that you're suffering, and it's being kind in the face of that suffering, saying, oh, this is really hard, poor thing, this is stressful, this is difficult, or it's really hard to feel inadequate or ashamed about something, and just being really open-hearted towards yourself. And then finally, it's so important remembering that suffering and imperfection is part of the shared human experience. I mean, where's that contract you signed before you came into this world saying you would be perfect and life would be perfect? And yet most of us, when something goes wrong, either in ourselves and our lives, we say, hey, this isn't supposed to be happening. But in fact, it is supposed to be happening. It's part of the experience. It's okay. So self-compassion involves remembering when things go wrong, when you make mistakes, that you need to be kind and caring and supportive towards yourself. And the great thing about self-compassion is that you're always there. You're there 24/7 to give you help when you need it most.
So as Dr. Neff said in her video, there are three components to self-compassion. Remembering you are not alone. I think now more than ever, this is something all educators can connect on. If you haven't already, I highly suggest connecting with other educators, whether in your own community or online. There are some listed in your resources as you make this transition to online teaching, or just teaching during this time of uncertainty. Remind yourself that pain and suffering are simply a part of life and growth. The second component of self-compassion is being mindful. This means we become aware of our thoughts and feelings, including our painful ones, and we don't avoid them. We acknowledge them and let them go, like clouds in the sky or leaves on a stream. There are many mindful meditations that can help. In the upcoming webinars in this series, we'll be learning a few, and in your resource packets, the apps have many guided meditations to support acknowledgement and letting go of painful thoughts and emotions. The third component is being kind to yourself. Be your very own cheerleader. Let go of perfectionism, a very known stressor of educators everywhere, and just let good enough be good enough. There are benefits to a practice of self-compassion. Some correlational data has shown that having more self-compassion results in increased well-being and buffers against the negative effects of distress. If that's not a sales pitch for a practice of self-compassion in our current situation with online instruction, isolation, shelter-in-place orders, I'm not sure what is. Not sure if you caught that phrase I was using, a practice of self-compassion. Like any other skill or habit, we need to build a muscle of self-compassion, hence the heart with barbell in your guided notes in case you were wondering. There are many ways to practice self-compassion. Some are in the moment, and some can become part of a routine. We're going to go over both. First, you name the emotion without judgment. For example, I'm not alone. Many people are feeling anxious right now. I put feeling anxious in italics rather than anxious because it is important to put that word feeling. This reminds us we are not our feelings or our thoughts. So you can do the same for your thoughts. I am having the thought that I am not good at this online stuff. It's different, right? Puts that little bit of distance between you and that feeling or thought, which is a good thing. Then, once you've named the emotion without judgment, you can extend kindness to yourself just as you would a friend. You can say something like, I am safe. I have what I need. I am strong and resilient. Or do something for yourself. Accumulate positive experiences or build mastery. Do something that brings a sense of accomplishment. Hi there. We're going to practice a loving kindness meditation. So I popped into the video so that we can do this together. I'm going to read a little bit of this part here. We're going to practice a very brief loving kindness to self meditation because we're in the self-compassion part of the video. There are longer versions to send loving kindness to others and to the world and to even those whom we may have difficulty with, like administration or maybe even parents you may work with. It's a great practice for what we're currently experiencing in our lives, and you can find more information to personalize this experience in the materials packet. Before we begin, I'd like you to pick a few phrases of loving kindness to send to yourself, such as, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I live with ease, or something that resonates with you. Now, I'd like you to get yourself into a comfortable position, whatever that means for you. If you choose, you can close your eyes. Remember, this is a Choose Your Own Adventure webinar. We can't see you. If you'd rather not close your eyes, feel free to pick a spot in your room to focus on, or just a downward gaze may work for you. It is never a good idea to require an eyes closed meditation. Students and adults may feel anxious for many reasons. It should always be a choice. Now, for about 30 seconds, if you choose, you're going to send yourself some warm wishes of loving kindness. But first, let's start by breathing. Let's take a few breaths in and out as you are able. Now, send yourself warm wishes of loving kindness. Now, if this were live, I sure would wonder how that felt for you, and I would ask you. Hopefully that felt good. We're going to move back into but I encourage you to practice that for yourself to increase your self-compassion. As I mentioned, we need to build our muscle of self-compassion, and we do that by practicing. We can practice in the moment when in distress and when judgment shows up. We can set timers and ask ourselves, am I in judgment? We can use apps and make self-compassion meditations part of our daily routines. There are many ways to practice. We reviewed how to practice loving kindness, and it's not an easy task to shift from judgment to kindness for many of us. Mark Coleman, in his book From Suffering to Peace, The True Promise of Mindfulness, gives us questions to ask ourselves when judgment shows up. He says, as they show up, ask these questions, and if the answers are that they do not serve us in a positive way, we let them go. For example, if when we talk to ourselves this way, we feel more shame, guilt, and sadness, we should let those judgments go. If we are tense and feel agitated, let those statements and those thoughts float by like clouds in the sky. And then he says, shift to action. Using tools like the loving kindness meditation, like the one we just did, say, do, and act in ways of loving kindness to self. Think of things that are self-soothing, self-caring, connection to others, like Dr. Neff was talking about. What brings us joy? Do that. He suggests acceptance of what is, and then let it go. Probably the most difficult practice, I would have to say. So we're going to use another guided meditation to help us accept and let go, to deepen our practice of self-compassion. This meditation comes from Tara Brach's book, Radical Compassion. It uses the acronym RAIN. Recognize what is happening in this moment. Acceptance, allow life to be just as it is. Investigate with a gentle, curious attention, and nurture with loving presence. So this time, sitting quietly, if you choose, close your eyes or just a downward gaze. Take a few deep breaths. Bring to mind a current situation in which you feel stuck. Take a moment to enter into that experience. Visualize the scene or situation. Recognize what is happening in this moment. As you reflect on the situation, ask yourself, what is happening inside me right now? What sensations am I most aware of? What emotions? Is your mind filled with churning thoughts? Take a moment to become aware of whatever's predominant or the overall emotional tone of the situation. Acceptance. Allow life to be just as it is. Send a message to yourself. Let it be. Find in yourself the willingness to pause and accept that in these moments, what is. At this point in RAIN, you are simply noticing what is true and intending not to judge, push away, or control anything you find. Investigate with a gentle, curious attention. Bring an interested, kind attention to your experience. Some of these questions may be helpful. What is the worst part of this? What most wants my attention? What emotions does this bring up? Where are my feelings about this strongest in my body? Be curious. Be gentle. Nurture with loving presence, calling on the most wise and compassionate part of your being. Offer yourself a kind message as if you were speaking to your best friend. Offer a nurturing, loving presence to yourself. Hopefully that was something that was useful for you and something that you can tap into. Tara Brach's book, Radical Compassion, is something you could get access to, and that you can find that meditation in her book. So when starting any new practice, we can always use a little support from our friends. We need to build in systems to remind us to practice and support us as we build our muscle of self-compassion. Building in a practice of self-compassion during a daily routine is a great way to be reminded and make a habit out of self-compassion practice. Building in a loving kindness meditation before bed or with your morning coffee could be a great way to build that muscle. Putting up reminders like Post-its around your house or in your phone to remind yourself to check if you're in judgment or to practice the rain meditation after lunch is a great support. Connecting with a friend and sharing an intention to practice and holding each other accountable, much like you would meet at a gym. Meet on Zoom or over the phone and share how you showed loving kindness towards self today. There are apps on your phone or alarms to check if you're tense, holding yourself in judgment, or just to send yourself a warm wish of loving kindness. Who couldn't use more of that these days? Here's my apartment, my mindful reminders. A couple things I can't do in a presentation without is not show my hero, Mr. Rogers, showing up. And to show that it's not all that cumbersome or intrusive to have Post-its reminding you to be mindful during your day. On the left-hand side is just this moment, just this task, making tea, or a reminder to breathe while I'm doing my work, or eating my lunch. These reminders are around my apartment just to remind me to be mindful during my day. We're going to make a shift over from self-compassion to compassion. As Dr. Neff talked about, to understand self-compassion, we need to understand a little bit about compassion. So we're going to make that shift now. As educators, we're no stranger to compassion. In fact, I might say we're experts, and I could probably turn the controls over to any one of you to finish off the presentation. And I have some info I'd like to share about the benefits of compassion, compassionate school communities, and compassion fatigue. And then we'll close with some resources. But first, let's watch a video by Happify on compassion.
My friend told me he often went to the same little corner grocery store in his neighborhood. One day, he realized that though it was usually the same woman working there each time, he hardly ever noticed much about her. He felt shocked at himself and thought, for all I really pay attention to her, she might as well be a cash register with arms. So he went into the store, determined to actually pay full attention to her. The first thing he noticed was that she was singing along to something playing on the radio, and that she had a really beautiful voice. When he said that to her, she responded with a wide, radiant smile. As soon as he told me that story, I realized that I too often went into the same store and also had hardly noticed that woman, except for maybe a vague sense that perhaps she was a little grim. I made a plan. I'm going to go into the store, say to her, I heard you have a really beautiful voice and watch her get really happy and give me a beautiful smile. But when I went into the store, actually paying full attention to her, the first thing I noticed was that she was already smiling broadly. Wait, what happened to a little bit grim? I realized again how much of a person we miss when we don't pay attention. People are people, not pieces of furniture. We each have a life, a story, changing moods, joys, sorrows. And if we pay attention to one another, we recognize that, and our lives are enriched by a continuing sense of discovery. That's the opening to true compassion. Sometimes we think of compassion as a gift, which we've either gotten or we haven't. If we haven't, we're out of luck. Or we think of compassion as some kind of emotional reaction that spontaneously erupts out of us. I think of compassion as a natural result that comes from actually paying attention. That means we can continue to cultivate it.
So there's an awareness that comes along with compassion practices. There are also many benefits that come along with compassion practices as well. As we talked about, there are many, many benefits of a practice of self-compassion. Compassionate practices too have many benefits. There's increased resiliency. Being compassionate towards others actually has positive impacts on our own health and happiness. It can increase our willingness and practices for collaboration with others. And wouldn't that be great in our school communities? And softens those difficult relationships. Simply being aware of another person, as the video described, can have a positive impact on that relationship. I'm thinking of my relationships with families and administrators. And then another benefit is it strengthens communities. And I'm seeing the effects of compassion in my life as I connect with friends and families during this time of what appears like isolation, but is really turning out to be more connection than I've ever had in years. As educators, we need to watch out for something very real called compassion fatigue. And some of you may be experiencing this right now. Some signs to look for: feelings of burnout. Remember the story from the beginning of the webinar of the friend that felt helpless, wanted to quit, didn't feel equipped to deal with the current circumstances? Compassion fatigue is more than that. It includes excessive worry about students and others, a term referred to as secondary trauma. Some may be experiencing little or no mental or physical energy to engage with activities, and find yourself avoiding tasks and other activities. These may be signs of compassion fatigue, or they may be just stressors of the new normal. And I want to validate that. We're experiencing difficult times. You're experiencing difficult times, and as we said earlier, you're not alone. A great antidote to compassion fatigue is self-compassion. And good news, you just learned some great ways to practice. If you're feeling you need more resources, let's take the shame out of asking for help. You can text the crisis line at 741-741 to communicate with a crisis counselor, or there's additional resources listed in your handout. Although we are not physically connected during these times of physical distancing, we can still build compassionate school communities as we hold virtual meetings and continue these practices when we transition back into physical school buildings. In her book, Onward, Cultivating Emotional Resilience in Educators, Alina Aguilar suggests adding compassionate practices to staff meeting agendas, such as loving kindness meditations, sharing positive stories, perhaps inviting students and families to share their experiences so they can be seen with compassion, and holding a space for educators to talk about emotions, possibly the most important, yet in our culture, the most difficult one. I highly recommend Alina's book as she walks us through a 12-month journey of how to open up a school community to freely express emotions in a healthy and productive way, to increase resiliency and build community. One thing you can do right now to increase your compassionate practices is to look for those subtle bids for attention, affirmation, and affection. The Gottmans, two leading researchers on relationships, coined the term bid as an attempt by one person toward another person to cultivate positive connection. The overt ones are easy to spot, such as, "Can I have a hug?" The subtle ones, like a text, "Hey," or "I just finished my lesson," may go unnoticed as a bid for an affirmation. During this time, as we are connected in a different way, those subtle bids for attention, affirmation, and affection may go unnoticed. Paying a little more attention can help build those relationships, and educators know a thing or two about relationships. It's all about relationships with our students and their families. So we talked about the importance of a practice of self-compassion and how important it is during these times to set up a practice and systems and supports for doing so. We did some exercises, a loving kindness meditation. We practiced the RAIN meditation, and in a minute we'll be doing an intention setting opportunity. We looked at the signs of compassion fatigue and creating a compassionate school communities, how we can do that now and how we can set that up for the future. And we talked about bids for attention and how they can be both subtle and more overt bids for attention, and how we can change that now to build positive relationships. So next we'll talk about setting an intention. So in your guided notes, you have an opportunity, or you can set an intention without writing it down. Writing it down does help flesh it out a little bit better. This is an opportunity to set your intention for a self-compassion practice or setting up a compassionate school community. Being as specific as possible, such as setting a goal, is a very good way to go about doing this. Being specific as to when you're going to practice, how you're going to practice, whom you're going to practice with is even better. And sharing that intention with someone, the research supports, is a way to hold yourself accountable for doing that. So let's just take a few minutes, maybe a few seconds actually, to just think about what it is that you're going to do differently as a result of watching this webinar. And I will hold that intention for you as well. I wish you luck on your intention, and I hope that those practices are something that you follow through on. And let's look at the resources. So some of these resources could become part of your intention, so maybe I could switch these around, but so these resources are things that can help you with your self-compassion practices. There's free videos from Dr. Neff. There's a series that were part of the one that we watched today. Happify is online. It's an app as well as online support and more videos like the one we watched in today's webinar. Being Well is a podcast by Dr. Rick Hansen, and I believe Dr. Neff is a guest on one of his podcasts. Untangle is a podcast from Meditation Studio. It also is a Meditation Studio is an app, free app. Greater Good Science Center, great for educators. Also want to point out that there is a link to a loving kindness meditation. It's about a 15-minute guided meditation, full loving kindness meditation, which means it includes loving kindness towards self, towards a loved one, towards someone that you may have harsh feelings towards, and also someone to the world. So that is the full loving kindness meditation. There's also a script by Magarishi Productions in your packet for that as well. And then my mentor, Daniela Falecki, Teacher Wellbeing, she is from Australia, and she has a wonderful packet of information. If you go to her website and sign up for her newsletter, she'll send you an online course. It's great information, great way to support your well-being, specifically for educators. Some books I highly recommend: Good Morning, I Love You for Self-Compassion by Shauna Shapiro. That's new this year. It's an excellent book with great golden nuggets, she calls them. Excellent for calm, clarity, and joy. Mark Coleman, From Suffering to Peace, The True Promise of Mindfulness. Excellent book with, at the end of each chapter is a mindful practice if you're interested in becoming more mindful. And then the Elena Aguilar book that I had mentioned, Onward, Cultivating Emotional Resilience in Educators. It's a 12-month journey through bringing more resiliency into the workplace, and it's for schools and educators specifically. I highly recommend it. And there's also a workbook that goes along with it to do exercises for in the school community. So that one is a real good purchase. Here's some apps. These are all free. This is a screenshot of my phone. All of these are free. I didn't pay for any of them, but they do have, you can pay beyond what is free and get all the extra bells and whistles. But I did want to point out the 1,000+ free guided meditations on Insight Timer, where you actually can look up using a search function any type of meditation. If you want a loving kindness meditation, you can type that in the search box and loving kindness meditations come up. If you want progressive muscle relaxation, if you're just needing some courage, you can put in courage, and guided meditations around courage will pop up. And they also have a meditation timer that you can use if you just want silent meditation. So that's my go-to, the Insight Timer meditation app. And then I spoke of earlier, if you wanted to check yourself and see if you're in judgment and wanted to practice more self-compassion, I use the Calm app for that. These are the notifications that come in, and I use these as peaceful reminders. Do you find yourself in judgment at the moment that the notification comes in, and then send myself some loving kindness at that time. These are great ways to practice self-compassion and check whether or not you're in self-judgment at that time, and send yourself some loving kindness. This is just to remind you that you are amazing and you're doing amazing work with your students. You're asked to do something different, and you are adaptable and resilient. And this is just WELL Educator's way to remind you that you are amazing and doing amazing things. And so I wanted to thank you, and it is with much gratitude that I get to be with you in your living rooms and your offices, wherever it is that you find yourself today. And thank you very much for your time. And with gratitude, if you have questions and you would like to contact WELL Educator, you can contact Renee at welleducator.com or visit me on my website. And hope to see you in the next 3 webinars. Have a great time. Bye.